My name's Ben Davies. I'm a photographer and writer, and I've spent the best part of the last 30 years working on projects related to disappearing cultures and traditions. This is my latest project. It's an exhibition, and there's also a book called Vanishing Bangkok. On previous projects, I've worked on a medium format camera, which is a little bit slower to use than a 35mm. But the reason I decided to use this sort of camera, I wanted to use an older medium to take photographs of older buildings. Plus, it's easier to adjust so that you don't get the sort of architectural distortions that you might get with other cameras. And more importantly, it really forces you to slow down and to photograph in a very different way to any other type of camera. Out of all the subjects that I photographed for this book, something in the region of 30 to 40% have either been torn down or have changed virtually beyond all recognition. So there's one that I took on the Chao Phraya River. It's an old wooden house and it's surrounded by these condos. When I photographed it, there was just a family playing in the water. And it did very much give a sense of the city which was built up around the river. It was torn down about 6 months later, and I believe there will be a condo on the site. So I find it very sad when these old buildings are taken away. I scouted these pictures before I shot them, and I would always try and go along with an interpreter and try and talk to some of the people, explain the project that I was doing. So I got an idea of how long they'd lived there, how many generations had been in the house, and how they felt about all the modern development that was taking place in the city. So a lot of them were a little bit suspicious when I turned up early in the morning, but once I'd explained what I was doing, I think a lot of people realized that actually they have lived through part of the history of the city, that it is important, and a lot of them were very helpful in terms of when I photographed the place. This barbershop, no one has actually used it for the last 10 years, but the owner still ran it. So he showed me around. He told me that it had been in the family for something like 70 or 80 years. And he actually said that he planned fairly shortly to just close it down and go and live in a temple. He said he didn't like modern development. He didn't like what was happening. So he was just going to go in the temple and just leave it closed. Bangkok is such a vibrant city. I felt that I had to give an idea of some of the energy, and I think also that where you're taking pictures of the old buildings to give a sense of contemporary life around it. So some of these I would take on maybe a 15th of a second. But that probably means that I won't get the absolute sharpness on the building. So you have to compromise with these cameras. Very hard to get everything. As I said, one of the reasons that I use the medium format is I wanted to give an idea of city life and movement. And it's very hard doing that if you're using a tripod with long exposures. So the medium format I would just have around my neck. I would walk around and I would try and build some sort of relationship between the people and the buildings that I was photographing, or I would try and get some choreography because I feel that this is all about a balance between the old and vanishing life of the city and the vanishing buildings themselves. It's strange that when you wheel out a large camera like this, a lot of passers-by come and ask to be photographed with it. So to begin with, I was having probably more photographs taken of me than I was actually taking photographs. But I think that when people see that, and when they hear that I spent 5 years on this sort of project, that they actually realize that there is something special about some of these old buildings. I think people start looking at them in a different way. I think it's very easy just to think this is rather an old derelict building and that you've walked past every day of your life. But I think that when you see a photographer spending a lot of time photographing it from different angles, maybe you start seeing it in a different light. Maybe you start appreciating whether it's the architectural style or the rather gorgeous the brickwork or some of the patterns, some of the texture. It's stuff that once it's gone, you can't replicate it. It'll never come back. Whereas the new shopping centres, we can see them in any other city. My view of the city really is that the speed that these old buildings are going, that 10 years from now, most of these buildings and communities that I photographed will be gone, which I do find very sad, because these are all aspects of life which really distinguishes Bangkok from Manila or Kuala Lumpur or any other city in the region. And I think if we're reduced just to these fancy shopping malls and new condominiums, then the culture in Bangkok will be greatly impoverished. So that's on the city side. From my point of view, I would like to go on and do similar projects in other cities, probably outside of Thailand. I have thought of going up country and doing some landscapes and trying to capture something of the old way of life before that goes up country. So that's certainly something I'm interested in. Well, I think the advice for anyone is the things that are important to them, that photograph now, because they go so rapidly. And if only I'd appreciated 30 years ago that so much of the city would have gone by now, I would have started the project much earlier. So I think in terms of photographing buildings, communities, ways of life, those are the things that you want to do now. In terms of how to photograph them, I don't have a problem with digital cameras, but I think the danger is people don't think about what they want because the camera does the work. And I think to me, one of the great things is not only the rather magical quality of the camera images, but the fact that you really have to slow down, really think about composition, about the different elements of the image. So you're really, it's like writing a story rather than just going in and pressing the shutter, which is possibly what a lot of people do with digital cameras.